Hi, thank you for tuning in today. As always, I'm so thankful that you're here to tune in so we can dive into the Word together as He prepares another message for me to share with you. Today I'm going to be talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. I remember as a little kid that this is constantly a story that I ask my dad to tell me over and over again. If we were to talk about and sit and talk about the Bible, I wanted to hear the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So it's been really nice to dive into this word, to look at it through different study Bibles that I have, to just understand it on a different level, and just reflecting back to like as a child and hearing the story versus being an adult and able to pick through and dive deeper into certain words, certain verses, and meanings behind it has just been really, really good. And I found myself doing that with many stories that we've gone through, like Daniel in the lion's den or Jonah and the whale, when Jesus walks on water. Like, these are all stories that I remember as a kid, but as an adult or in a place in my life where God is revealing these messages to me and giving me the ability to pick through and to dig deeper into His Word, it's just been cool to dig through and work through these stories again. And that just goes to show that the Bible and what it teaches us is eternal. Like the words in there last through generations, and it will last through our time, and we can reread and reread and reread, and that God's word, while His word in here stays the same, but His message for us each time we read it can reveal something entirely different. So my encouragement in that is for you to stay in the word, and if you haven't gotten into the word, my encouragement is to get into the word, because it's good and it's rich and it's everlasting and it's overflowing as long as you're willing to dive into it. Anyways, back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I'm going to give you just kind of a little quick rundown of the story, and then I will touch on the smaller part of the verse because it's a long one. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were three Jewish men in the book of Daniel, and they were thrown into a fire for refusing to bow down to the king Nebuchadnezzar's demands. Nebuchadnezzar built a big gold statue, and he demanded that everyone bow to it any time they hear the horns blow. Kings and leaders will build things. False kings and false leaders will build things, and they will claim them to be great things, and that you should bow to them or focus on them or cling to those things. And they tell you this to try and unify people and rally people behind them to rule. But they do it for their own gain, no matter what the cost is to their people. And we see in this story the cost of following and disobeying false kings in this story. But we also get to see the deliverance God provides to His people when it's in His will to do so, when His people are standing in the fire. So, in the story, like I said, he builds the statue. He tells them anytime they hear the music to bow down and worship him. And people do that, except for, I'm sure there were others. But he said, if you do not follow and bow down and worship, then you will be sent into a fire and you will burn. So I'm sure there were others, but specifically in this highlighted as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They do not bow down. And someone says to the king, these three people are not bowing down to what you said. And in his fury, he summons Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and asks them, is this true? You are not obeying what I told you to do. And he they did not deny disobeying him. They stood firm in what they did, yet and they said to him, "We do not have to defend ourselves to you." And you can imagine that someone like Nebuchadnezzar, and in this situation, that he's already mad because they disobeyed him. But here they are standing in front of him, still willing and still standing firm that they will not bow down to him or his idols or his statues or anything. And then they don't have to defend themselves. So kings and leaders will often say, "What do you have to say for yourselves?" And they're saying, "I don't have to defend myself to you." Because they don't have to bow to him, and they don't have to defend themselves to him. And they stood their ground and boldly said, "We don't have to defend ourselves," and they would be faithful that God would deliver them no matter what. So with their fate sealed, they're tied up and sent to the fire. They went trusting, knowing, believing in God the whole entire way. And I'm going to read from Daniel. It's Daniel 3, and it's 20. I'm going to start at 26. And Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted. So this is after they've been thrown into the fire. He approached the opening and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants, the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, and governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was their hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except for their own. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way." Their fate was sealed to the fire, and they trusted, believed, and knew that God would deliver them no matter what. In life or in death, God was going to deliver them. Does their faith mean that they weren't scared? Or that the reality of them being thrown into a fire less real? No. They were human, and they probably felt all the real human feelings, but their faith in God outweighed anything else. They went in the fire, and they went in the fire, and they came out alive. They lived. They had a fourth man in the fire. They came out no longer bound by the king's ropes, free and untouched by the fire. The men that brought them, this is just a part of the story that we didn't get to read, that I didn't get to read, but when they were sent to the fire, the men that brought them there, they died just because they took them there, because the fire was so hot. There's a few things here that stand out to me. This shows that the cost of following a false king or a leader, they were sent and worked only to better the king. Oftentimes the servants, guards, or military people who worked for the king, their life, they took a vow to protect the king no matter what, to follow, to worship, to be however which way the king, in support of the king. So they went, worked, and served this king, and they died because of it. They died serving him. And it was only to elevate the king. And there wasn't deliverance for those guards in serving the king. When you follow leaders, cultures, false idols, it's at a cost to your soul. You won't find rest or deliverance when you are following to build someone else's name or legacy. Only God offers a place for your soul to rest, deliverance, even in death. And that's what these three men held on to. They cling to it when faced with the fire. Who do you cling to when life gets rough? What does fire look like today? Because we won't get thrown into this giant furnace, hopefully, today. But what does the fire look like today? Cancel culture, maybe? Loss of status, loss of friends, being outcast from what society says is the way to be, the way to go. And when life and false idols and leaders are looking at you to look to them, are you following them? Is that who you're looking back at? Or are your eyes locked on God's? These are all super important questions, especially that last one. Where are your eyes? Where does your heart turn to when things get tough? God delivered them, and Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges the God that they serve. But that doesn't mean that he repented and gave his life to the same God that they serve. He basically, in a way, pardons them. The same promise that these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is extended even to the king Nebuchadnezzar, even to those guards that passed away, even to those people that worshiped Nebuchadnezzar's idol that he placed out there. The same promise that God gives to deliver these three men in life or death, no matter what, however his will sees, deliverance is offered the same way, but it's not by just acknowledgement of him. Profession does not always mean possession. These three men believed, trusted, and knew what God could do. Their life and their actions proved that. They didn't just acknowledge God. They could have acknowledged God, but still bowed and worshiped and pretended so they wouldn't face a fire. But that's not the point of all of this. They are told not to worship any other God before him. That's what they believed, that's what they knew, that's what they trusted. And because they laid down their old self at God's feet, God renewed them, delivered them time after time, in many situations, I imagine. And in this one particularly, when they're faced with life or death, they believed that God would deliver them no matter what, in life or in death. And so do you profess, acknowledge God, but don't actually obey him? Or do you believe that he is, and know and trust that he's God, and that there is no other God before him? In order for Nebuchadnezzar to receive God in this way, it would take a sacrifice of himself. And he wasn't ready for that yet. He wasn't there for that yet. I encourage you to evaluate who you serve. Is it yourself? Is it idols? Is it leaders? And if the answer is anything other than God, I want you to ask yourself the next question is, are you just acknowledging God's presence without actually believing in it? And then if you are believing in it, are you putting it into practice in your life? Because all of those things are important. You have to believe that he is God and that he will deliver in life or death. And then you have to trust in those things. And when you can do both of those things, you have to obey him, knowing those things. So, who is it that you're clinging to when you're faced with the fire? Are you in a fire currently? Are you seeking deliverance? And where are you seeking it from? There's a lot of things that this world is going to throw at you. And there's a lot of outlets and a lot of things. I mean, we see it constantly. And in the times that we're in, the news, everything, negative, negative, negative. But I want you to know that there is a God that offers peace and rest for your soul in life and in death. But we just have to believe and trust in him and his deliverance. And when we can do all things and we obey him in that same promise that was extended to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that is extended to you. There isn't anything different other than culture, life, and circumstances for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and you. God loved them, and God loves you. They served God, and you can serve God too. It just requires a sacrifice of ourselves in order to serve him. And as I said with Nebuchadnezzar and with false idols and leaders, they build these things to benefit themselves, to leave a legacy for themselves. Whereas when we are putting our faith, hope, and trust in God, we believe and we know that we're serving God and he is offering something back to us. So it's not just serving God to build him up and that's the end of it. He's offering us an eternity outside of this life when we trust and believe in knowing in him. So we're not just serving him to build up his kingdom. We're serving him to be a part of his kingdom. And that's the beauty of being in relationship with him, that he's offering us a piece to be a part of that kingdom. So I encourage you, like I said, to evaluate who it is that you serve and who you cling to when faced with the fire. As always, thank you for tuning in, and we'd love to see you in person. We have services on Sunday and on Wednesday. We have services for teens, children, young adults, men and women, and we'd love to see you. But if not, as always, we'll see you here next week. Bye.